Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The swing moved back and forth, its chains creaking in perfect rhythm. But there wasn't even a breeze that October night in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. I know because I was standing at my bedroom window, watching it happen for the third time that week. The empty swing in my neighbor's backyard shouldn't have been moving at all. Yet, there it was, swaying like someone invisible was sitting on it, pumping their legs higher and higher into the darkness. If you're listening to this right now, lying in bed with your eyes closed, I need you to know something. This isn't just a story, this is a warning. And by the time I'm done telling you what happened in that small Pennsylvania town, you'll understand why some things are better left alone. You'll understand why I haven't slept properly in 6 months. And you'll understand why every time you hear a swing set creak, you'll think of what I'm about to tell you. But first, let me ask you something. When was the last time you really looked at an empty swing set? Really looked at it? Because once you know what to look for, you can never unsee it. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I moved to Millbrook in late September. You know the type of place: tree-lined streets, white picket fences, the kind of American small town where everyone waves from their porches and kids still ride bikes until the streetlights come on. I'd taken a job as a night shift nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, and the little blue house on Maple Street seemed perfect. Quiet neighborhood, reasonable rent, and a big oak tree in the front yard that turned the most beautiful shade of gold that fall. The Millers lived next door, an older couple who'd been there 40 years. Mrs. Miller brought me a casserole my first night. Mr. Miller helped me fix a leaky faucet that weekend. Good people. Normal people. The kind of neighbors you want when you're new in town and working odd hours. Their backyard had this old swing set. You know the kind. Metal frame, probably from the 70s or 80s, with 2 swings and a slide that had seen better days. Mrs. Miller mentioned their grandkids used to play on it when they visited, but that was years ago. Now it just sat there, slowly rusting in the Pennsylvania weather. I worked 3 nights a week, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Those first couple weeks were an adjustment. Coming home as the sun was rising, trying to sleep while the rest of the world was waking up. But I got into a routine. Work, home, blackout curtains drawn, sleep until mid-afternoon. Simple, predictable, safe. It was my 4th week in Millbrook when I first noticed it. I'd gotten home around 7:30 that morning. October 15th, I remember because I'd just paid rent. The sun was barely up, painting everything in that soft golden light that makes even rusty swing sets look almost magical. I was exhausted. We'd had 2 cardiac emergencies that night, and all I wanted was my bed. But as I walked from my car to the front door, something made me glance over at the Miller's backyard. Maybe it was the sound. This soft, rhythmic creaking that seemed out of place in the morning stillness. Or maybe it was just that feeling you get sometimes, like someone's watching you. The swing was moving, not wildly or anything, just swaying, back and forth, like someone had been on it and just hopped off. I stood there for a moment, keys in my hand, watching it. The morning was completely still. Not even a breeze to rustle the leaves that had started falling from the trees. But that swing kept moving, its chains groaning softly with each arc. Probably just the wind, I told myself. Even though I could see the leaves on the ground weren't moving at all. Even though the American flag on the Miller's porch hung limp against its pole. I went inside and forgot about it, pulled my blackout curtains, took a shower, fell into bed. But that night, or I guess that afternoon while I was trying to sleep, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed I was on that swing, pumping my legs, going higher and higher the way you do when you're a kid and you think, maybe, just maybe, if you go high enough, you'll loop all the way around. The chains were cold under my hands and I could smell rust and old metal. But the weird thing was, I wasn't alone. Someone was pushing me. I couldn't see them, couldn't turn my head to look, but I could feel hands on my back, pushing me higher with each swing. Cold hands, small hands like a child's, and they were humming. This tune I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar, like something you heard once in a half-remembered dream. I woke up around 4 that afternoon, heart racing, sheets soaked with sweat. The dream faded the way dreams do, leaving just fragments. The smell of rust, the feeling of cold hands, that haunting melody I couldn't quite recall. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table trying to shake off the unease. Through my window I could see the Millers' backyard. The swing set stood there, perfectly still in the afternoon sun. Normal, innocent, just an old playset nobody used anymore. But that night at work, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel those cold hands pushing me higher. The second time I saw the swing moving was 3 nights later. I'd worked another long shift, October 18th, a Thursday. We'd been short-staffed, and I'd barely had time to grab a cup of coffee, let alone take a real break. By the time 7 a.m. rolled around, I was running on pure adrenaline and muscle memory. The drive home was a blur of empty streets and red lights that seemed to last forever. Millbrook was always quiet in the early morning, but that day it felt almost abandoned, like one of those apocalypse movies where everyone just vanishes. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the yard. And there it was again. That sound. Creak, creak, creak. This time, I didn't even pretend it might be the wind. I walked straight to the fence that separated my yard from the Millers and looked over. The swing was moving faster this time. Not crazy fast, but purposeful. Like someone was really on it, pumping their legs, trying to get some height. The empty seat swayed back and forth, and I swear I could see indentations in the rubber. Like someone was sitting there. Like the weight of an invisible body was pressing down on it. I gripped the fence so hard my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to call out to ask who was there, but another part, a deeper, more primal part, kept my mouth shut. Because what if someone answered? The swing kept moving for maybe 2 more minutes while I stood there frozen. Then, gradually, it began to slow. The arcs got smaller and smaller until, finally, it stopped. But it didn't stop naturally. You know how a swing slowly comes to rest, maybe swaying just a tiny bit before going completely still? This wasn't like that. This stopped suddenly, like someone had grabbed the chains and held them in place. I practically ran to my front door, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get the lock open. Once inside, I deadbolted the door and went straight to my bedroom, not even bothering to take off my scrubs. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that swing, those indentations in the seat, the way it had stopped so unnaturally. So I did what any rational person would do. I got up and Googled swing moving by itself. You'd be surprised how many results came up. Forums full of people describing similar experiences. Rational explanations about wind patterns and physics, but also other stories. Stories about playgrounds with dark histories. Stories about children who died too young and never really left. I fell down that rabbit hole for hours reading post after post, each one making my skin crawl a little more. By the time exhaustion finally overtook me around noon, my head was full of ghost stories and urban legends. That's when the dreams got worse. This time, I wasn't on the swing. I was standing next to it, watching someone else. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, with dark hair and pigtails. She was wearing one of those old-fashioned dresses, the kind with the Peter Pan collar that nobody puts their kids in anymore, and she was swinging higher and higher, laughing this bright, tinkling laugh that should have been joyful but somehow wasn't. "Push me higher," she called out. But she wasn't talking to me. She was looking at something behind me, someone behind me. I tried to turn around, but I couldn't move. I was frozen there, watching her swing back and forth, her laughter getting louder and more distorted with each arc. "Higher!" she screamed. "Higher!" The chains started to groan and crack. Rust flaked off like snow, and still she swung higher until she was nearly horizontal at the peak of each swing. Defying gravity, defying logic. Then the chains snapped. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. My room was dark, the blackout curtains doing their job, but I could still hear it, that creaking, that rhythmic, endless creaking. I stumbled to my window and yanked the curtain aside. The afternoon sun was blinding after the darkness, and it took my eyes a moment to adjust. The swing wasn't moving. It hung there, perfectly still, like it had never moved at all. But on the ground beneath it, pressed into the dirt, were footprints. Small footprints. Child-sized footprints. They led from the swing to the back door of the Miller's house. I should have left it alone. Should have minded my own business, kept my head down, maybe looked for a new place to live. But you know how it is when something gets under your skin, when a mystery wraps itself around your brain and won't let go. Plus, I was starting to feel like I was going crazy. I needed to know I wasn't imagining things. I needed proof that what I was seeing was real. So, the next day, October 19th, I knocked on the Miller's door. Mrs. Miller answered, wearing a flour-dusted apron and smiling that warm, grandmotherly smile that made me feel guilty for what I was about to ask. "Sarah, how nice to see you, dear. How are you settling in?" "Great, Mrs. Miller. Actually, I was wondering, could I ask you something about your backyard?" Her smile flickered for just a second. So fast, I almost missed it. "Of course, dear. Would you like to come in? I just made cookies." The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. Family photos covered every surface. Kids, grandkids, relatives I couldn't place. Normal family stuff. Nothing that screamed haunted swing set in the backyard. We sat at her kitchen table, and she poured me a glass of milk to go with the still warm chocolate chip cookies. For a moment, I almost felt silly. Here I was, about to ask this sweet old lady about her possibly haunted playground equipment. "So," I started, trying to sound casual. "I work nights, as you know, and sometimes when I get home in the morning, I've noticed your swing set moving, even when there's no wind." Mrs. Miller's hand paused halfway to the cookie jar. "Oh? Yeah, it's probably nothing. Maybe it's just the way the wind hits it or something. But I was curious if you'd ever noticed it too." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were different, older, sadder. "How often do you see it moving, dear?" "A couple times a week, maybe. Always in the early morning, around the time I get home from work." Mrs. Miller stood up abruptly, walked to the window that overlooked the backyard. The swing set was visible from there, rusty and still in the afternoon light. "We should have taken it down years ago," she said softly. "Harold keeps saying he will, but, well, some things are harder to let go of than others." I waited, sensing there was more. "We had a granddaughter," she continued, still staring out the window. "Emma. Bright as a button, that one. Used to spend summers with us when her parents were working. She loved that swing set. Would spend hours out there, pumping her little legs as hard as she could, trying to touch the clouds." My throat felt dry suddenly. "Had? Car accident. 8 years ago this December. She was 7. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the wall clock. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. Mrs. Miller turned back to me, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was a long time ago, but sometimes I still see her out there, or think I do. Trick of the light, probably, or maybe just an old woman's wishful thinking. She sat back down, pushed the cookie jar toward me. "You're not the first to notice the swing moving. The previous tenant mentioned it too, and the one before that. Harold says it's just the wind, but you don't think so." She met my eyes. "Do you believe in ghosts, Sarah?" I thought about my dreams, about the footprints in the dirt, about the way that swing moved with such purpose. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe." Mrs. Miller nodded slowly. "Emma always said she'd come back and visit. Children say things like that, don't they? Make promises they can't keep." She paused. "But sometimes in the early morning when the world is quiet, I hear her laughing. And I know it's impossible. I know it's just my old mind playing tricks, but I hear her." We sat in silence for a while after that. The cookies grew cold. The milk developed a film on top. And outside, the swing set stood motionless, keeping its secrets. When I finally left, Mrs. Miller hugged me at the door. "Be careful, dear," she whispered. "Some things are better left alone." I should have listened to her. That night, I couldn't concentrate at work. Every time I had a quiet moment, I thought about Emma. 7 years old, loved to swing, died in December 8 years ago. I did the math. She would have been 15 now, a teenager. Probably too old for swing sets, but the right age for makeup and boys and high school drama. All the things she'd never get to experience. When my shift ended, I drove home slower than usual, dreading what I might see. But the swing was still. The yard was empty. Everything was normal, except for the humming. As I walked to my front door, I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible, but there. That same tune from my dream, the one I couldn't quite place. It was coming from the direction of the swing set. I stopped, key in the lock, every muscle in my body tense. The humming continued. A child's voice, sweet and clear in the pre-dawn darkness. Then it stopped, and the swing began to move. I didn't sleep that day, couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma, or what I imagined Emma looked like. Dark hair and pigtails, Peter Pan collar, that bright, terrible laugh from my dreams. By evening, I'd made a decision. I was going to find out what really happened. Not just the car accident, but why she was still here, why she couldn't let go of that swing. The Millbrook Library was old. One of those Carnegie buildings with high ceilings and that particular smell of old books and dust. The librarian, a woman who looked like she'd been there since the place was built, didn't even blink when I asked for newspaper archives from 8 years ago. "December, you said?" "Yes, looking for information about a car accident. A little girl named Emma." "Emma Miller." The librarian's face softened. "I remember. Terrible thing, just before Christmas too. She led me to a computer with access to the digitized newspapers. Should be in the December 20th through 23rd editions. That's when it happened." I spent the next hour reading, my heart sinking with each article. December 20th. Local child injured in hit-and-run accident. December 21st. 7-year-old Emma Miller in critical condition. December 22nd. Community holds vigil for Emma Miller. December 23rd. Emma Miller, age 7, passes away. But it was the details that made my blood run cold. Emma hadn't died in the car. She'd lingered for 3 days in the hospital. The same hospital where I now worked. She'd been conscious for some of it, talking to her parents, her grandparents. And according to one article, her last words were about the swing set. She kept asking if someone could push her on the swing when she got better, her mother was quoted as saying. She said she wanted to go higher than ever before, high enough to touch the clouds. I sat back in the chair, pieces falling into place. The early morning timing, that was when she'd been hit walking to school. The humming. One article mentioned she'd been humming her favorite song when she left the house that morning. And the swing. The swing was her unfinished business, I left the library as the sun was setting, my mind racing. If Emma was really there, if her spirit or ghost or whatever was tied to that swing, what did she want? Just someone to push her? Someone to help her go higher? I should have gone to work. I should have driven straight to the hospital and forgotten all about ghostly children and moving swings. But I didn't. Instead, I went home. The Miller's house was dark. They went to bed early. The backyard was bathed in moonlight, making the swing set look like a skeleton against the sky. I stood at the fence for a long time, watching, waiting. At exactly 7:30, the same time I usually got home from work, the humming started. Soft at first, then louder. That same tune, and suddenly I recognized it. You Are My Sunshine. Of course, every kid knew that song. The swing began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed, and this time I saw her. She was translucent, like looking through frosted glass, exactly as I'd dreamed. Dark pigtails, Peter Pan collared dress, little Mary Jane shoes kicking at the air as she swung. She was humming and pumping her legs, trying to go higher, always higher. I should have been terrified, should have run inside and locked the door, and maybe called a priest or something. But instead I felt sad, deeply, achingly sad, because she was alone. She'd been alone for 8 years, swinging by herself in the dark, waiting for someone to push her higher. Before I could think better of it, I was climbing over the fence. The moment my feet hit the ground in the Miller's yard, the humming stopped. The swing slowed, but didn't stop, and Emma turned to look at me. Her face was pale, her eyes dark hollows, but she was smiling. "Will you push me?" Her voice was like wind through leaves. "I want to go higher." Every instinct screamed at me to run. This was wrong, unnatural, dangerous, but I thought about her last words. About a 7-year-old girl who just wanted someone to push her on the swing. "Okay," I whispered. I walked behind the swing, my legs feeling like they were moving through quicksand. Put my hands on her back and felt nothing but cold air. But I pushed anyway, miming the motion. The swing went higher. "More!" Emma laughed, and it was the bright, tinkling sound from my dream. "Higher!" I pushed harder, throwing my whole body into it. The swing creaked and groaned, going impossibly high, defying physics, defying reality. Emma's laughter filled the night air, joyful and free. "I can almost touch them," she cried. "The clouds! I can almost—" The chain snapped, not broke, snapped. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet night. The swing seat flew forward, up out, carrying Emma with it. She soared through the air, arms outstretched, still laughing. And then she was gone, not fallen, not crashed, just gone. Faded into the moonlight like she'd never been there at all. The swing seat hit the ground with a dull thud. The chains hung limp from the frame, finally broken after all these years. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the ruined swing set, waiting for something, for Emma to reappear, for the humming to start again, for the world to make sense. But nothing happened. The backyard was quiet, the swing was still, and somewhere in the distance I heard a child's voice whisper, "Thank you." I climbed back over the fence and went inside, called in sick to work, sat at my kitchen table until sunrise, trying to process what had happened. The next morning, I watched from my window as Mr. Miller discovered the broken swing. He stood there for a long time, just looking at it. Then Mrs. Miller joined him, and they held each other, both of them crying. They took the swing set down that afternoon. I still live in that little blue house on Maple Street, still work nights at the hospital. The Millers and I don't talk about what happened, but sometimes Mrs. Miller brings me cookies, and her smile seems lighter somehow, less sad. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when I come home from work, I stand in my yard and listen. Not for humming or creaking swings, but for laughter. The bright, free laughter of a little girl who finally got to touch the clouds. They say ghosts stick around because of unfinished business. Something they need to do, something they need to say, something they can't let go of. But sometimes, they just need someone to push them a little higher. Sometimes they just need help letting go. So if you ever see a swing moving without wind, if you ever hear a child's voice in an empty playground, maybe don't run. Maybe stop and listen. Maybe ask if they need a push, because everyone deserves to touch the clouds at least once, even if they have to wait 8 years for someone brave enough or foolish enough to help them. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night, the thing that makes me check my locks and pull my curtains tight. The morning after the swing broke, I found something in my yard, right by the fence where I'd climbed over. Footprints. Small, child-sized footprints in the dirt, leading from the miller's yard to my back door. They stopped right at the threshold, like something had stood there trying to decide whether to knock. And next to the footprints, written in the dust on my porch, "Your turn to swing." I had my landlord install a security system the next day, change the locks, even had a priest come bless the house, though I didn't tell him why, because I realized something that night. Emma hadn't been alone on that swing set. In my dreams, someone had been pushing her, someone with cold hands, someone who hummed along with her song. And now that Emma was gone, they needed someone new to play with. I still hear it sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, the sound of chains creaking, the whisper of wind that isn't there. A child's voice, different from Emma's, older, sadder. "Won't you come and swing?" So far, I've resisted. So far, I've stayed inside. But each night the voice gets a little louder, a little closer, and I wonder, what happens when I can't resist anymore? What happens when it's my turn to swing? If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, do me a favor. Check your backyard tonight. Look at your local playground. Watch for swings that move without wind. And whatever you do, don't offer to push, because once you start, you might never stop. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them. And remember, some things are better left alone. Some invitations are better left unanswered. Some swings are better left still. But then again, everyone deserves to touch the clouds, don't they? Now, sleep. Or at least, try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, that's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, soft where wet, wrong. Like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you, does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot behind the curtain every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't, because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? Number It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up. That's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, because soon it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different. Not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you. Still in control, for now. You could still check. You could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still. Let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. And it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you, and comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can. Story number 2. The first time I saw them, they were already watching me. Standing at the edge of my property in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. 6 men in pristine white coveralls. Not moving, not working, just watching. Their construction trucks gleamed like they'd rolled off the lot that morning. But something about the way they stood there made my coffee mug shake in my hand. I'd hired them to renovate my late grandmother's house. The lowest bid by far. No online reviews, no references. Just a business card that appeared in my mailbox one morning. Complete construction, we leave no trace. If you're listening to this, lying in bed, maybe with the lights off, I need you to understand something. When they say they leave no trace, they mean it. And before this story ends, you'll understand why that promise still makes me check my locks twice every night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you about the crew that built something in my house that shouldn't exist. Something that's still there. Waiting. The story begins now. That October morning started like any other. Millbrook was doing its small-town thing. Mrs. Chen walking her ancient beagle. The Hendersons arguing about their fence again. Normal, safe, predictable. I'd been living in my grandmother's house for 6 months. Still felt like a guest. Her doilies on every surface. Her ceramic cats watching from shelves. Her smell. Lavender and old paper. Lingering in corners, the house needed work, desperately. Pipes that groaned like they were in pain. Electrical that flickered when you walked too heavy. Floors that had given up on being level decades ago. But it was mine now, the only thing she'd left me, the only thing I had left of her. The quote from Complete Construction had been slipped under my door. Not mailed, not handed to me, just there one morning. Like it had always been there. $12,000 for a complete renovation, less than half what other contractors quoted. I should have questioned it. Should have wondered why they didn't have a website. Why their business card was blank except for a number and that promise, "We leave no trace." But grief makes you stupid, and I was drowning in it. Then the trucks arrived, 3 of them. White, spotless, no company logos except for small text on the doors, complete construction. They parked with mathematical precision, exactly 3 feet apart, exactly parallel to the curb. I watched from my kitchen window as 6 men stepped out in perfect synchronization, like they'd rehearsed it. White coveralls, white hard hats, white gloves, even their boots were white. Somehow, not a speck of dirt, not a single stain, like they'd never worked a day in their lives. But their faces, have that quality you see in people who've worked too long in the sun. Weathered, aged, but wrong. Like someone had described what weathered looked like to an artist who'd never seen it. The foreman approached my door. Each step exactly the same length, each arm swing exactly the same arc. I remember thinking his face looked unused, like a mannequin that had just learned to smile. He knocked 3 times, perfectly spaced. "Good morning, Miss Sarah Chen." His voice had this quality, like it was coming from somewhere deeper than his throat, like an echo preceding the source. "We're here to begin the renovation." I nodded, trying to shake off the unease. Yes. Come in, I'll show you around." He stepped inside, removed his boots without being asked, underneath. His socks were white. Of course they were. But they didn't touch my floor, not quite, like he was floating a millimeter above the hardwood. No, that's crazy, trick of the light had to be. "Beautiful home," he said. But his eyes weren't looking at the house, they were looking through it, past it, at something I couldn't see. "Your grandmother maintained it well. You knew her." His smile widened. "Too many teeth, no. Same number of teeth, just arranged wrong somehow. We know all the old houses in Millbrook. It's our specialty, the old ones, the ones with history. The house had been my grandmother's for 60 years, a Victorian-era beauty that had seen better days. Peeling paint, sagging floors, that musty smell that clings to old wood. Built in 1892, she'd told me, by a man who understood things, whatever that meant. Mr. White followed me through the rooms. The other 5 men stayed outside, still as statues, still watching. I could feel their eyes through the walls. "This is the living room," I said, gesturing at the faded wallpaper, the water stains on the ceiling. "As you can see, it needs work." He touched the wall, just 1 finger, and I swear the wall shuddered, like a horse twitching off a fly. "These old houses," he said, "they remember every family, every secret, every change. Your grandmother understood that. She kept things contained." "Contained?" He turned to me. For a second, his face flickered, like a TV with bad reception. Still him, but not. Something else underneath, older, hungrier. Then it was gone. "Some houses are built on old ground, Miss Chen. Ground that was used for other purposes. Before houses, before people. Your grandmother knew this. Why do you think she never changed anything? Never painted? Never renovated?" I thought about all the times I'd begged her to update the kitchen, fix the bathroom. She'd always refused. "This house is fine as it is," she'd say. "Some things shouldn't be disturbed." She was old-fashioned, I said. But even as I said it, I remembered other things. The salt lines at every doorway, the mirrors hung at specific angles, the basement door that was padlocked from both sides. "Old-fashioned," Mr. White repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, she understood the old fashions, the old ways. But you want modernization. You want change." "I want a house that doesn't feel like it's falling apart." "Of course." His smile was back. "Customer service perfect. We'll start with the foundation. These old houses, they hide things. We'll find them all." "Find what?" I asked. He was already walking toward the basement door, stopped, turned back. Whatever needs to be found, whatever's been waiting. The basement door was locked, padlocked, just like always. Grandmother had given me the key, made me promise to keep it locked. Just old junk down there, she'd said. Dangerous, unstable. But Mr. White produced a key. Not the key I had, something older, more elaborate. The padlock opened with a sound like a sigh. How did you? We have our ways. Miss Chen, old houses, old locks, they remember us. The stairs creaked as we descended. The basement was exactly as I remembered. Stone walls, dirt floor in places, concrete in others, boxes of Christmas decorations, grandmother's trunk, the oil furnace that hadn't worked since the 90s. But Mr. White wasn't looking at any of that. He was staring at the walls, walking slowly, running his hands over the stone. Yes, he whispered. Yes, it's still here, still waiting. What's still here? He turned to me in the dim light. His eyes reflected like a cat's. The original foundation, Miss Chen, the one from 1892, and below that, the one from before. Before the house, before the town, before the colony, before names and maps and understanding. This land, this specific spot, it's always been special. A thin place, where things meet, where things can cross over. My skin crawled. The basement suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were leaning in. We'll start here, he said. We'll restore what was hidden, update what was bound. Modern conveniences, Miss Chen, but with respect for what lies beneath. They started work immediately. No discussion of permits, no contracts to sign, just began. The other 5 men filed in, carrying tools I didn't recognize. Long things that might have been saws, curved things that might have been hammers, boxes that hummed with subsonic vibration. No small talk, no radio, no coffee breaks, just the rhythmic sound of work. But wrong. A hammer would strike, but the sound would come a second later. A saw would cut, but the wood wouldn't fall until the blade was already withdrawn. I went upstairs, made coffee, tried to work on my laptop, but I could feel them below me, moving in patterns, following lines I couldn't see, the house groaning around them, adjusting, remembering. By lunch, they'd supposedly examined the entire foundation. I went to check. The basement looked exactly the same. No, not exactly, cleaner. The dust was gone, the cobwebs erased, but no visible work, no holes in walls, no new supports. We work in layers, Miss Chen, Mr. White said, appearing at my shoulder. I hadn't heard him come up. First, we understand the house, then we improve it. But you haven't done anything, haven't we? He gestured at the walls. Look closer. I did, and saw it. The stones were different, still old, still worn, but arranged differently. Patterns that hadn't been there before, symbols that might have been scratches, might have been stains, might have been something else. Your grandmother's protections were admirable, he said, but outdated. We'll install something more permanent. That night, after they left at exactly 5 p.m., walking in perfect synchronization to their trucks, I went down to check their progress again. The basement was different in the dark. The patterns on the walls seemed to move, to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I found a stone that hadn't been there before. Smooth, black, warm to the touch. When I picked it up, the house shuddered, just once, like it was waking up. I put it back quickly, and noticed something else. The boxes of Christmas decorations had been moved, opened, resealed, but wrong. The tape facing the wrong way. The dust disturbed in impossible patterns. Inside one box, between the tinsel and the plastic reindeer, I found a journal, my grandmother's handwriting. They came in 1962, the first entry read. The same crew, the same white trucks, the same promises. I sent them away, but they'll be back. They always come back. When the bindings weaken, when the watchers sleep, when the house remembers what it was before it was a house. My hands shook as I read more. Entries about sounds in the walls, about neighbors who disappeared, about things seen in mirrors that weren't there when you turned around, about a door that had to stay closed, always closed, hidden behind the furnace, sealed with symbols only she understood. The last entry was dated a week before she died. Sarah will inherit the house. I've tried to prepare her, but she doesn't believe in the old ways. Doesn't understand that some renovations reveal more than they repair. I can only hope the bindings hold, that the watchers remember their purpose, that the door stays closed if they come again, if she lets them in. May God forgive me for what I've failed to prevent. I looked at the furnace, old, rusted, but behind it, barely visible, a gap, a space where the wall didn't quite meet the floor, and from that gap, the faintest sound, like breathing, like something vast and patient, waiting, the second day. I woke to find them already working. 6 a.m., I hadn't heard them arrive, hadn't heard the trucks. They were just there, in my backyard, standing in that perfect formation, staring at the house like they were reading something written on its walls. I made coffee, tried to pretend everything was normal, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The journal, grandmother's warnings, that sound behind the furnace. I'd hardly slept. Every creak of the house had sounded like footsteps, every settling beam like something trying to get out. Mr. White knocked at exactly 7 a.m. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced. "Good morning, Miss Chen. We'll be working on the structural elements today. You may hear some unusual sounds. This is normal. The house is adjusting." Adjusting to what? To its true nature? Before I could ask what that meant, he was gone. Back to his crew, they moved into the house like a white tide, spreading through rooms, upstairs, into spaces I didn't know existed. I tried to work, laptop open, emails to answer, but I couldn't focus. Every time I looked up, one of them was there, standing in a doorway, measuring something invisible, tapping walls in rhythmic patterns, and always watching me. Not directly, never directly, but in reflections, in windows, in the black screen of my phone. Their eyes following me, tracking me, waiting for something. Around 10 a.m., Mrs. Chen knocked. Muffin, her beagle, was pulling desperately at his leash, trying to get away from my house. "Sarah, dear," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Is everything all right? The most peculiar thing, all the dogs on the street are acting up, won't walk past your yard. And the birds." She was right, I hadn't noticed. But there were no birds, no squirrels, nothing living anywhere near my property, like a bubble of absence surrounded the house. "Just the construction," I said, "probably disturbing them." "Construction," she frowned, "but I haven't heard any." That's when I realized. She was right. Despite 6 men supposedly working, there was no noise, no hammering, no sawing, nothing. The house was silent as a grave. "They're very quiet workers," I said lamely. Mrs. Chen stared at me, really stared, like she was trying to see through me. "Your grandmother used to say things about this house, about what's underneath." I thought she was going senile, but now, what did she say? That it wasn't meant to be a house, that someone built it here to keep something down, to hold something in place. She said the basement went deeper than anyone knew, that there were rooms below rooms, spaces that weren't spaces. She said, Mr. White appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Chen stopped mid-sentence, took a step back. Muffin whimpered. "Good morning," he said. That perfect smile, those 2 bright teeth. Lovely day for a walk. Mrs. Chen mumbled something and hurried away, Muffin practically dragging her. Mr. White watched them go, then turned to me. "Your neighbor is perceptive, but Perception can be dangerous. Miss Chen, some things are better left unperceived. What are you doing to my house? Restoring it, revealing it, removing the lies your grandmother told it about itself. He went back inside. I followed, found them in the living room. Doing something to the walls, not construction. Something else. They were drawing, or maybe erasing, their hands moving in complex patterns, leaving trails of something. The air shimmered where they touched. What is that? I demanded. Updating the electrical, Mr. White said, as if that explained the symbols appearing on my walls. Symbols that hurt to look at, that seemed to move when I blinked. I went to the kitchen, called Mike, my contractor friend. Mike, I need you to come look at something. These contractors, they're doing things that don't make sense. What company? He asked. Complete Construction. Silence. Long silence. Sarah. His voice was different. Careful. There's no company by that name. I know every contractor in the tri-state area. There's no Complete Construction. But they're here. Right now. In my house. Sarah, listen to me. I worked on a house once. In Bridgeport. The owners said they'd hired a crew that didn't exist. White trucks. White uniforms. By the time I got there... He paused. The house was gone. Just gone. Empty lot, like it had never been there. My blood turned to ice. What? Get out, Sarah, whatever they are, whoever they are. Get out of that house. But when I tried to leave, the door wouldn't open. Not locked, just wouldn't. Like the house didn't want me to go. Leaving so soon? Mr. White asked. He was standing in the hallway, hadn't been there a second ago. But we've only just begun. Don't you want to see what your house really is? Let me out. You are out, Miss Chen, for the first time. You're outside the prison your grandmother built, outside the lies, the constraints, the bindings. You're free to see what's really here. The walls rippled, like water, like skin. The symbols they'd drawn were glowing now, pulsing, and through them, I could see things, other rooms, other houses, other times, the same space, but layered, folded, all existing at once. Your grandmother knew, he continued. Her grandmother knew, and the one before. Watchers, guardians, keeping the door closed, keeping the things below from rising. But why? Why should such wonders be hidden? Why should such power be contained? I backed away, toward the kitchen, toward the back door. But the house was changing around me. Corridors stretching, rooms multiplying, the geometry going wrong. We're not contractors, Miss Chen. We're liberators. We free houses from the lies they've been told, from the shapes they've been forced into. We return them to their true forms. I ran. Through a kitchen that was my kitchen, but also every kitchen that had ever been in this space. Past a living room where I could see myself as a child, visiting grandmother, see her as a young woman, inheriting the house, see the first family, the Whitmans, see them screaming as something came through the walls. The back door opened. Thank God, it opened. I burst outside into air that felt too thick, too real. The crew was there. All 6 of them. Standing in a circle, chanting in that not language. And in the center of their circle, a hole, not dug, just there. Like it had always been there. Going down, down, down into darkness that moved. The basement was just the beginning, Mr. White said. He was behind me. Of course he was. Your house has such deep roots. Miss Chen, such ancient foundations. Would you like to see them? No, I whispered. But you've already paid for the full renovation. Wouldn't want to waste that, would we? They worked until exactly 5 p.m., then left, as always. Synchronized, perfect. The hole in the backyard was gone, like it had never been. The house looked normal from the outside, better than normal. Paint fresh, windows gleaming, roof straight and true. But inside, the walls breathed, the floors had a pulse. The ceilings showed stars that weren't in any earthly sky, and everywhere, those symbols, growing, spreading, revealing. I found more of grandmother's journals that night, hidden in places that hadn't existed that morning. She'd known, had spent 60 years holding it back, 60 years keeping the door closed, the door that the house had been built to hide, to contain, to prevent. The Whitmans thought they could control it, she wrote. Thought they could build a cage of wood and stone, but you can't cage something that exists outside space. You can only hide it, distract it, make it forget what it is. The house isn't a prison. It's a disguise. A lie told so well that even the thing below believes it. But if the lie is revealed, if the truth is restored. I looked at the basement door. Still there, still locked, but the padlock was different now. Older, more elaborate, and through the keyhole. That breathing, louder now, eager. I tried to sleep in my car, but I could feel the house calling, pulling. I was part of it now, had been since the moment I'd invited them in. Since I'd signed the contract I couldn't remember signing. The third day would be worse, I knew that. Felt it. The third day was when they'd open the door. Day 3, I didn't go home, couldn't. Spent the night in my car outside the library, watching the sunrise, trying to pretend the world was still normal, still sane, still bound by rules I understood. But I had to know, had to understand what was happening to my house, to my life. So, when the library opened, I was the first one through the door. Sarah, Margaret, the librarian, looked concerned. "Honey, you look terrible. Is everything okay?" "I need to research my house," I said. "The history, the real history, everything you have." She led me to the archives. Boxes of old newspapers, property records, photos. "Your grandmother used to come here," she said quietly, researching the same things. Always asking about the Whitmans, about what was here before the house. I started with the newspapers. 1892, the year the house was built. Found the article about Josiah Whitman. Local businessman, eccentric, built the house on land no one else would buy. Land the native tribes had avoided. Land where nothing grew right. But there was more. Another article, smaller, hidden in the back pages. About the construction crew Whitman had hired. 6 men from nowhere. No one knew where they'd come from, where they stayed. They worked only at night, only in white. And when the house was finished, Whitman and his entire construction crew vanished on October 31st, 1892. The article read, "Neighbors reported strange lights. Sounds like the earth itself was screaming. In the morning, the men were gone. The house remained, empty, waiting. I found the photo, grainy, old, but clear enough. 6 men in white, standing in front of my house. The same faces, the same impossible smiles. The same eyes that looked through instead of at. Mr. White, front and center. Unchanged after 130 years. I dug deeper, found records of every family who'd lived in the house. The Morgans in 1910. Gone after 6 months. Left everything behind. The Campbells in 1923. The father found in the basement. Aged 50 years in a single night. The mother and children. Never found. The Hendersons in 1945. The Jangs in 1961. Always the same pattern. Families moving in. Trying to renovate, then disappearing, or fleeing, or dying, until my grandmother, who moved in after the Jangs vanished, who never changed anything, never renovated, never disturbed what lay beneath. She knew, I whispered. She did. Margaret was standing behind me, had been there for who knows how long. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She understood things, old things, dark things. She kept the balance for 60 years, kept the door closed, kept them from finishing what they started. The construction crew. They're not a crew. Sarah, they're servants, heralds, things that prepare the way. They've been trying to finish that house since 1892, every generation. They return, and every generation, someone has to stop them. But I let them in. Margaret's face went pale. Oh, Sarah, no. I showed her the photo, pointed to Mr. White. This is him, the same man, working on my house right now. She grabbed my shoulders. Listen to me. That house, your house, it's not built on a thin place. It is the thin place. It's a door, a gateway. And those things, they're trying to open it, to finish what Whitman started. He thought he could control what came through, use it. But it used him instead, and now they're using me. I ran back to my car, had to get home, had to stop them. But the town looked different, older, like layers of time were showing through. I could see Millbrook as it was in 1892, as it was before, when the trees were wrong, when the sky was a different color, when things that weren't human walked where Main Street now ran. My house looked perfect from the outside, magazine cover perfect. But the perfection was wrong. Too sharp, too clean, like a computer rendering of a house rather than a real one. The trucks were there, but now I could see them for what they were. Not trucks, just the idea of trucks, the suggestion of vehicles, things that looked like transportation but were really transformation, changing what was into what had been, what should be into what was waiting. I burst through the front door. The inside was impossible. Rooms that opened into other rooms that opened into themselves. Stairs that went up and down simultaneously. Walls that were floors that were ceilings. And everywhere, those symbols. No longer just drawn, now carved. Now part of the structure itself. Bleeding light that wasn't light. Singing in frequencies that hurt to hear. Miss Chen, Mr. White materialized from a wall. Or maybe he was the wall. Hard to tell anymore. Perfect timing. We're about to begin the final phase. Stop, I said. I know what you are. What you're doing. My grandmother. Your grandmother was a jailer. His face flickered. Showed something underneath. Something that had too many angles. Too many teeth. Keeping us from our purpose. Keeping the door closed. But doors are meant to be opened. Miss Chen, that's what they're for. They were all in the basement now. I could feel them, sense them through the twisted geometry of the house, chanting, preparing, unmaking reality one symbol at a time. I ran for the basement, through corridors that fought me, past rooms where I could see myself running from different angles, different times, always running. Always too late. The basement door was open, wide open, and the stairs went down forever. Not into earth, into something else. Something that had been waiting beneath the earth. Beneath reality. The original foundation. The true shape of the space. I descended. Had to, each step taking me further from the world I knew. Into older darknesses. Stranger geometries. The walls were that not stone. Not metal material now, covered in symbols that moved, that lived, that watched. The crew was there, in a chamber that couldn't exist, that violated every law of physics, of space, of sanity. They stood in their perfect circle, around a door. Not a door in a wall, a door in the air, in reality itself. Breathing, pulsing, cracking open, and through the cracks, I could see. I can't describe it. Language wasn't made for what was on the other side. Eyes weren't designed to see it. Minds weren't built to comprehend it. But it was vast and hungry, and it had been waiting so long, so very long. The restoration is nearly complete, Mr. White said. He wasn't pretending to be human anymore, none of them were. Just white shapes. Suggestions of forms. tools of something greater. Soon, the house will remember its purpose. Soon, the door will open fully. Soon, what was separated will be joined again. No, I said, but my voice was small, insignificant. A whisper against the roar of unmaking. Your grandmother held us back with her will, her knowledge, her sacrifice. He gestured to the walls, and I saw her, saw the symbols she'd carved, not with tools, with her own fingers, her own blood. 60 years of reinforcing, of strengthening, of holding the line. But she's gone, and you invited us in, gave us permission, paid us to reveal what she hid. The door pulsed, wider, the cracks spreading, and through them, things began to push. Not tentacles, not limbs, not anything that had a word, just intrusions. Places where reality was replaced by something else, something older, something that had been waiting before the world was made. Why? I asked. Why do this? Because, Mr. White said, this is what we are, what we've always been. We prepare the way, we open the doors, we restore what was hidden. It's not evil, Miss Chen. It's just natural, the natural state of things. Before the lie of solidity, before the fiction of physics, before the prison of perception. The house shuddered. Not with impact, with recognition. It was remembering. Remembering what it had been built to contain, to channel, to become. Your world is so small, he continued, so limited, bound by up and down, in and out, before and after. But beyond the door, all directions exist at once. All times happen together. All possibilities are real. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that worth releasing? It's worth dying to prevent, I said, and I meant it. Finally understood what my grandmother had understood, what all the guardians had understood. Some doors should stay closed, some truths should stay hidden, some realities should never meet. I ran, not up the stairs, those were gone, consumed, but through the walls. Because the walls weren't walls anymore. They were suggestions, and I rejected them. Burst through into the basement I remembered, the real basement. The lie of a basement that kept the truth at bay. The furnace was there, old, rusted, but real, solid. Fixed in space and time, and behind it, the gap, the space my grandmother had written about. Where the true door was hidden. The physical door, the anchor, the thing that had to stay closed. I could hear them coming, not following, just arriving, being where I was, because distance meant nothing to them now. But I had seconds. Maybe. I squeezed behind the furnace, found the door, wood, older than the house, older than the town, covered in her symbols, held shut by her will, her sacrifice. And I understood, finally, what she'd done. What I had to do. The door was weakening, the symbols fading, because they were tied to her and she was gone. But I was here. I was her blood, her continuation. I pressed my hands against the wood, felt it pulse, felt what was behind it. Wanting in, wanting out, wanting to end the separation between here and there, between is and isn't, between real and more real. No, I said, and put my will into it, my refusal, my rejection of their reality. The door solidified, just a little, just enough. Mr. White was there, all of them were there, filling the basement, filling the space between spaces. You can't stop it, Miss Chen. The contract is signed, the work is begun. The restoration must be completed. Then complete it, I said. But complete it right. You promised to leave no trace, and so leave no trace. Undo what you've done. Restore the lie. Rebuild the prison. Make it forget again. That's not what we do. It's what you promised, in writing, on the contract, complete construction, leave no trace. So complete the construction of the illusion, leave no trace of the truth. They flickered, all of them, caught between purpose and promise, between their nature and their word. You're bound by your own contract. I pressed on. You have to finish what you started. But I'm the client. I decide what finishing means. And I want the house my grandmother left me. Nothing more, nothing less. Complete that construction. Leave no trace of anything else. The door behind me pulsed, angry, desperate, but the symbols held, my will held, and the contract. The contract held them all. Mr. White smiled. That perfect, terrible smile. Clever, Miss Chen. Very clever. Your grandmother would be proud. Very well. We'll complete the construction. We'll leave no trace. But remember, we always come back. When the bindings weaken, when the watchers sleep, when someone else inherits. Someone who doesn't understand. Someone who wants renovation, modernization, change. Then I'll be ready, I said. I'll prepare them, like she prepared me. Even if I didn't listen, even if I didn't understand, the knowledge was there, waiting, and I'll pass it on, generation to generation, guardian to guardian, until you give up, or until the world ends, whichever comes first. They began to work, backwards, unmaking their unmakings, restoring the lies, rebuilding the prison, symbol by symbol, room by room, making my house just a house again, making the basement just a basement, making the door just wood and will and time. It took them 3 days, 3 days of reverse construction, of careful unbuilding, of precise forgetting, but they did it because they had to, because the contract demanded it, because their nature was to complete what they started, even if completion meant failure. That was 3 months ago. The house looks exactly like it did before they came. Peeling paint, sagging floors, musty smell, perfect, perfectly normal, perfectly safe, perfectly containing what needs to be contained. But I know the truth. Late at night, I can still feel it. The breathing behind the walls, the pulse beneath the floors, the watching through the windows. The door is closed. The symbols hold. The lie is intact. But what's beneath hasn't gone away. It's just waiting. Always waiting. I've made changes, not to the house, never to the house, but to myself. I've learned, studied, prepared, read every journal my grandmother left, every book she hidden, every symbol she carved. I understand now, the responsibility, the weight, the price of keeping the world intact. Mrs. Chen still walks her beagle, but now she nods when she passes. Knowing, understanding, she's part of it too, part of the network, the watchers, the ones who know, who guard, who remember. Your grandmother saved my life once, she told me last week. In 1987, something tried to come through my mirror. She was there in minutes, with salt and symbols and words in languages that hurt to speak. She sealed it, saved me, saved the whole street, maybe the whole town. There are more of us than you'd think, scattered, hidden, normal people living normal lives, but watching, always watching, for the signs, for the crews that don't exist, for the renovations that reveal too much, for the doors that want to open. I've started a journal, like my grandmother, like hers before her. Instructions, warnings, knowledge, for whoever comes after, because someone always has to come after. The house will outlive me. The door will outlast my will. And the crew is eternal, patient, waiting for the next opportunity, the next weakness, the next person who doesn't understand. Last week, I saw them again, 3 towns over, different name on the trucks, Eternal Restoration Services, same white uniforms, same synchronized movements, same impossible faces, working on a colonial-era house. The owners, a young couple, excited about their bargain renovation. I tried to warn them, showed up at their door, tried to explain. But how do you explain the impossible? How do you convince someone that their contractors aren't human? That their house is being turned into something else? They thought I was crazy, had me escorted off the property. The house disappeared 3 days later. Just gone. Empty lot. like it had never been. The couple, no one remembers their names. Their families don't exist. Their social media accounts vanished, as if they'd been erased from reality itself. Because that's what happens when the door opens fully, when the restoration completes without interference. The lie doesn't just break, it never was. Everything connected to it. Everyone who lived there, loved there, existed there, gets pulled through, becomes part of the other side, part of the thing that waits. I couldn't save them, but I learned. Each failure teaches, each loss strengthens resolve. My grandmother saved hundreds over her 60 years. Thousands, maybe. I've saved 3 so far. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's something. The house helps, now that I understand it. Now that we're partners instead of prisoner and guard. It shows me things. In reflections, in shadows, in the spaces between sleep and waking. Other houses, other doors, other crews working their patient destruction, and something else, something worse. The crews aren't random, aren't opportunistic. They're following a pattern, a design. Each house they transform, each door they open. It's part of something larger, a network, a web, a gradual weakening of the barriers between here and there. My grandmother knew this. Her final journal, the one I found last month, hidden inside the wall itself, talks about the pattern, the plan, the slow unmaking of reality, one house at a time, one family at a time, until there are too many openings, too many cracks, too many places where the other side bleeds through. They're not trying to invade, she wrote. They're trying to merge, to make our world and theirs the same place, the same reality, where their rules apply, where their nature is natural, where we're the anomalies, the errors, the things that don't belong. I've mapped 17 houses in the tri-state area, all built on thin places, all containing doors, 17 potential openings, 17 places where reality could break. 5 have active guardians, like me, like Mrs. Chen. People who understand, who maintain the barriers, who keep the lies intact. 12 don't. 12 houses, waiting, vulnerable, ready for renovation, for restoration, for revelation. And I'm just one person, can't guard them all, can't watch every classified ad, every mysteriously cheap contractor, every too-good-to-be-true offer. But I try. Drive by them regularly. Look for the signs. White trucks, perfect synchronization. Work that makes no sound. Neighbors who stop walking their dogs. Birds that won't fly overhead. Reality that seems too sharp, too clean, too perfect. Sometimes I get there in time, can interfere, disrupt, delay. Sometimes I don't. And always, I come home to my perfectly imperfect house, my sagging floors, my peeling paint, my basement that's just a basement, my door that's just a door, held closed by will and symbols and the weight of generations. I sleep, when I can sleep, in my grandmother's room now, where she carved the most protections, where the walls are thick with her refusal, her determination, her love, because that's what it was, really. Love. Love for a world that makes sense. Love for people who don't have to know. Love for a reality where up is up and down is down and doors stay closed. The crew will come back, I know that, when I'm old, when I'm weak, when I'm gone, and someone else inherits. Someone who doesn't understand, who wants modern conveniences, updated aesthetics, open floor plans. Someone who'll see a business card slipped under their door, a promise of perfect renovation, a price too good to refuse, and they'll call, and the white trucks will arrive, and the synchronous men will smile their empty smiles. Unless I prepare them. Unless I leave enough warnings, enough knowledge, enough truth hidden in the walls, in the floors, in the very bones of the house. Truth that will whisper to them. Wake them. Make them understand before it's too late. That's why I'm recording this. Writing it down. Hiding copies everywhere, in the walls, in safety deposit boxes, on servers around the world. Because someone needs to know. Everyone needs to know. The crews are out there, right now, working, changing, revealing, opening. Look at your house. Really look. Does it feel too perfect, too clean, too new? Have you had work done recently? Work you can't quite remember arranging? Workers you can't quite recall meeting? Changes that happen too quickly, too quietly, too completely? Check your basement, check your walls. Look for symbols that hurt to see. Doors that weren't there before. Spaces that feel wrong. Angles that don't add up. Rooms that are bigger on the inside. Stairs that go somewhere else when you're not watching. And if you find them, if you see the signs, if you realize your house isn't just a house anymore, run. Don't pack, don't hesitate, don't look back. Just run. Because once the restoration is complete, once the door is fully open, there's no closing it. No containing what comes through. No restoring the lie. Your house, your family, your existence will become part of the other side. Part of the thing that waits. Part of the slow merger of realities. And no one will remember you existed. No one will know you were ever here. You'll be erased, not just from the world, but from the concept of world itself. The construction crew that leaves no trace doesn't just mean they clean up after themselves. It means they clean up everything. Everyone. Every trace of the reality they've replaced. I learned that from the Hendersons, the ones who vanished in 1945. I found their journal too, hidden in a space between spaces. They tried to document what was happening. Tried to leave warnings, but they waited too long. The last entry, scrawled in handwriting that degraded with each word, said, "The house is breathing, the walls are thinking. We're becoming part of it, part of them, part of what's behind the door." I can feel myself forgetting my name, my face, my species. Soon will be white uniforms and synchronized steps and smiles that mean nothing. Soon we'll be knocking on other doors, making other offers, opening other ways. Save yourself. Save your world. Don't let them finish. Don't let them... It ends there. Mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-existence, sometimes, late at night, when the house is settling, when the barriers are thin. I think I see them. The Hendersons, part of the crew now, white uniforms, perfect smiles, empty eyes, working on houses that don't exist yet, in times that haven't happened, in places that never were. That's what waits for all of us, if we fail, if we let them finish, if we let the doors open, if we let the merger complete, not death. Death would be merciful, but transformation, becoming part of the system that unmakes reality, tools of the thing that waits, servants of the space between spaces. My grandmother held them off for 60 years. I've managed 3 months. But I'm learning, growing stronger, understanding more. The house teaches me. The symbols guide me. The other guardians support me. We're few, but we're determined. We're mortal, but we're stubborn. We're human, but that's our strength, our refusal to be anything else. The crew thinks in geological time, cosmic time. They can wait, they've always waited, but we think in heartbeats, in breaths, in the fierce urgency of now. Every day the door stays closed is a victory. Every house that remains just a house is a triumph. Every person who never has to know is a life saved. It's not enough, it's never enough, but it's what we have, what we do, what we are. Guardians, watchers, the ones who know, the ones who refuse, the ones who keep the construction incomplete, the restoration unfinished, the revelation delayed. And if you're listening to this, still awake, still aware, still in a world that makes sense, thank a guardian you've never met. Thank the people who keep the doors closed. Thank the ones who maintain the lie that keeps you safe. Or, better yet, become one of us. Watch your neighborhood, check the classifieds. Notice the trucks that don't belong, the workers who move too perfectly, the renovations that promise too much. And when you see them, when you know, when you understand, interfere. Delay, disrupt, warn. Save who you can. Guard what remains. Keep the doors closed. Keep the world whole. Keep reality real, because the construction crew that leaves no trace is always working, always building, always revealing. And the only thing standing between them and the end of everything we know is us. The few, the stubborn, the aware. The ones who know that some things should stay broken. Some houses should stay old. Some doors should stay closed. Forever. No matter the cost, no matter the price, no matter how many times they come back. We'll be ready. We have to be. Because the alternative doesn't bear thinking about. Sweet dreams. If you can still dream. If dreams still mean what you think they mean. If you're still you, check tomorrow, check your house. Check your reality, just to be sure. Just to be safe, just to be. Are you still listening? Good, that means you're still here. Still real. Still human. For now. But check your house tomorrow. Check the basement, check behind the furnace. Because I've told you the truth. And truth has a way of attracting attention. The wrong kind of attention. The kind that knocks on doors at 6 a.m. The kind that offers renovation at prices too good to be true. The kind that smiles with too many teeth and speaks in echoes and moves in perfect synchronization. I may have marked you by telling you this, by making you aware, by opening your eyes to what hides in plain sight. The crew notices such things, notices who knows, who watches, who might interfere. So, check your mail tomorrow. Check for business cards that appear from nowhere. Check for offers you didn't request. Check for crews you didn't call. And if they come, remember what I've told you. Remember what my grandmother knew. Remember what the house taught me. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some lies are meant to be believed. Some constructions are meant to remain incomplete, no matter what they promise, no matter what they offer, no matter how perfect they'll make everything. Perfection is the lie. Imperfection is what keeps us safe, the cracks, the flaws, the things that need fixing but never get fixed. They're not problems. They're protections. They're the weight that holds reality in place. The friction that keeps the worlds from sliding together. The blessed imperfection that makes us human and keeps us so. My house still needs work. Desperately. The floors still sag. The paint still peels. The basement still smells of must and age and time. But I'll never fix it. Never change it. Never improve it. Because improvement is revelation. And some things should never be revealed. Some things should stay hidden. Stay buried. Stay bound. Forever and ever. World without end. Reality without breach. Doors without opening. Amen. Still there? Still listening? Then one last thing. One last warning. One last truth, if you see them. The crew, the white trucks, the perfect smiles. Don't just run. Don't just hide. Don't just hope they'll pass you by. Call this number, 555 Guardian. It's not a real number. Not in the way you understand real. But if you dial it, if you speak the words, if you say the door is opening, someone will come. Maybe me. Maybe another guardian. Maybe someone you've never met but who's been watching. Waiting. Ready. We can't save everyone. Can't stop every renovation. Can't close every door, but we try. We always try. And sometimes we succeed. Sometimes we keep the world whole for another day. Another year. Another generation. It's not much, but it's everything. It's reality itself. Preserved one house at a time, one family at a time, one closed door at a time, until the end. Whatever end comes first, the crew's victory or the heat death of the universe. Place your bets, make your choice, stand with us, or sleep, and dream, and pretend the world is solid, safe, sensible. We'll stand guard either way. We always have, we always will. The guardians, the watchers, the ones who know, the ones who refuse to let the construction complete. Now you know too. What you do with that knowledge, that's up to you. But remember, they're out there, right now, working, building, revealing, opening, and only we can stop them. Only we can keep the doors closed. Only we can maintain the lie that keeps the world intact. Will you help? Will you watch? Will you remember? I hope so. For all our sakes, I hope so. The story ends here, but the watch continues. The guard remains. The doors stay closed. For now, for today, for as long as we can hold them. Share this story, let others know, build the network, strengthen the watch. Because the more who know, the more who guard, the more who refuse to let their houses be perfected, the safer we all are. Comment if you've seen them. The white trucks, the synchronized workers, the renovations that promise everything and deliver nothing but hunger from behind the walls. Subscribe if you want to know more, want to learn the symbols, the protections, the ways to spot them before they spot you. Because this isn't just a story, it's a warning, a call to arms, a desperate plea from one guardian to potential others. We need you. The world needs you. Reality itself needs you to watch, to guard, to keep the construction incomplete forever, no matter the cost. Join us before it's too late, before the doors open, before the merger completes, before the construction crew that leaves no trace, leaves no world for us to save. Story number 3. The first time I heard my grandmother's voice coming through the bedroom wall, she'd been dead for 15 years. I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment in Portland, Maine. Third floor of a Victorian brownstone built in 1892. The kind of place with original hardwood floors that creak with every step. Radiators that clank like prisoners rattling chains. And walls so thin you'd think they were made of paper. But these walls held something else entirely. "Sarah, honey, pass me that butter dish." The voice drifted through like smoke. Clear as day, my grandmother's unmistakable Minnesota accent. The way she stretched out her vowels. The little laugh she'd do after every sentence. My hands froze over the cardboard box I was opening. The butter dish. I remembered that butter dish. Pale yellow ceramic with tiny painted daisies. She'd asked me to pass it to her at Thanksgiving dinner. 1994. I pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing. Just the muffled sounds of my neighbor's television bleeding through. Must have been my imagination. Exhaustion from the move. Grief playing tricks. I went back to unpacking. But then, 3 nights later, it happened again, and now our story begins. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and old secrets. That's what I told myself as I settled into bed that third night, pulling my grandmother's quilt up to my chin, the one she'd made with her arthritis-gnarled fingers, each stitch a small act of love. Outside, Portland's October wind rattled the windows like something trying to get in. Then I heard it. The market was packed today. Couldn't find a decent tomato in the whole place. A man's voice, deep, gravelly, coming from inside the wall behind my headboard. Not muffled like neighbor noise, but crisp, present, like someone speaking directly into my ear. "Well, Harold, you know how Saturdays get." A woman's reply, younger, maybe 30s. The conversation continued. Mundane talk about groceries and traffic, but something felt wrong. The phrases, the cadence, even the brand names they mentioned. Piggly Wiggly, A&DP Supermarket, stores that hadn't existed in decades. I sat up, heart hammering, pressed both palms flat against the wall. The plaster felt warm, too warm for October, like something alive pulsing beneath the surface. "Did you hear about the Kennedy boy?" My blood turned to ice water. The Kennedy boy. Which Kennedy? And when When was this conversation happening? The voices faded like a radio station going out of range. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the wall, waiting. But all I heard was the building settling, pipes groaning. Normal old building sounds. Normal. Nothing about this was normal. The next morning, I called my landlord, Mr. Chen, asked about previous tenants. He laughed, said I was the first person to last more than a month in 3B in years. Said people always complained about the noise. What kind of noise? I asked. He paused. Long pause. Just noise. I spent that day at the Portland Public Library, researching. The building's history unfolded like a horror novel, built by a shipping magnate named Cornelius Ashford. His daughter Eleanor died in my apartment. 1918 flu pandemic. Then a seamstress in the 30s, suicide. A family in the 50s, carbon monoxide leak. Every decade someone died in 3B. Every decade the walls absorbed their final words. That night I came prepared. Notebook, pen, digital recorder. Though something told me it wouldn't capture what I was hearing. These weren't sounds bouncing through the air. These were memories bleeding through time. 10:43 p.m. The wall began to warm. "Mama, I don't feel good." A child's voice. Boy, maybe 7 or 8, weak, feverish. "Shh, Tommy. Dr. Morrison will be here soon." The mother's voice cracked with barely contained panic. I knew that tone. Every parent knows that tone. The helplessness, the bargaining with God. "It hurts, Mama." "I know, baby, I know." I wrote down every word. The boy's breathing grew labored, wet, rattling. Spanish flu had to be. 1918. Eleanor Ashford wasn't the only one who died that year. The conversation played out like a recording. The doctor arriving too late. The mother's keening wail. Then silence. Terrible, heavy silence. I touched the wall where the voices had emerged. The plaster was cold again. Cold as a tombstone. But I noticed something else. A pattern in the paint. Faint. Like water damage, but deliberate. I grabbed my phone's flashlight, traced the marks, letters, words, messages scratched into the plaster and painted over dozens of times. They won't stop talking. Make it quiet. I can't sleep. Previous tenants, all of them driven out by the voices, all of them desperate enough to claw messages into the walls. I should have left then, packed my things and broken the lease, but something kept me there. Maybe curiosity, maybe stubbornness. Maybe the rent was just too good to pass up in this economy, or maybe I needed to hear more. A week passed. I'd filled 3 notebooks. The voices came every night now, different times, different eras, but always between 10 and midnight, always in the bedroom, always conversations from moments before death. I learned to recognize the decades by the slang, the products they mentioned, the news they discussed. The 40s brought a young couple arguing about his draft notice. She begged him not to go, he promised he'd come back. The wall never revealed if he kept that promise. The 60s gave me a late-night phone call. A woman speaking to someone named Richard. Panic in her voice. "The baby's coming too early. Something's wrong." The line went dead mid-sentence. I checked the records. Martha Brennan. Died in childbirth. April 12, 1967. Apartment 3B. But it was the 70s conversation that changed everything. You can't paint over them forever, you know. Different from the others. Self-aware. Like the speaker knew about the wall. Knew about the voices. "I've tried everything else." A man's voice, exhausted, defeated. "They're not recordings, David. They're echoes. Emotional echoes. Trauma soaked into the bones of this place." Then how do I make them stop? You don't. You listen. You witness, or you leave. I can't afford to leave. Then you'll end up like the others, part of the wall, part of the conversation. The voices cut out abruptly. I scrambled for my laptop. David, 70s, apartment 3, B. Found him. David Marsh, freelance writer. Body discovered October 30th, 1978. Cause of death, undetermined. Neighbors reported strange smells, thought he'd been dead for days, but the coroner said less than an hour. How could both be true? Unless time worked differently near the wall. I started timing the conversations, mapping them. The death moments weren't random. They followed a pattern. Fibonacci sequence, each conversation lasting exactly as long as the sum of the two before it. First 1 minute, then 1 minute, then 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Tonight would be 21 minutes, the longest yet. I set up my phone to record, knowing it was useless but needing to try. Arranged my notebooks, made coffee. Strong, black. I needed to be alert for whatever was coming. 10:37 p.m. The wall began to hum, but this time was different. Hello, is someone there? The voice was clear, modern, present tense. Not an echo, a woman, young, scared. I can hear you breathing. I know you're listening. My hand trembled as I wrote. This wasn't a memory. This was happening now, somewhere, somewhen. My name is Jennifer Reeves. I'm in apartment 3B. The walls. Something's wrong with the walls. I knew that name. Jennifer Reeves. The tenant before me. Left suddenly 3 months ago. Mr. Chen said she'd broken her lease. Disappeared. Left all her furniture. If you can hear this, if anyone can hear this, don't trust the walls. They're hungry. They feed on moments, on endings, on the space between last breath and silence. Her voice grew fainter, older, like she was aging while she spoke. I painted over the messages, tried to warn the next person, but the wall ate my words too. It's eating me now, pulling me in, making me part of the pattern. Jennifer? I spoke aloud. First time I'd tried to communicate back. Jennifer, can you hear me? Oh God, you're here. You're in the room. I can feel you through the wall. We're in the same space but different times, overlapping, bleeding together. The air in my bedroom grew thick, viscous, like breathing through honey. My phone's screen flickered. The digital clock on my nightstand ran backward, forward, froze. Listen, there's something you need to know about this building. About Cornelius Ashford. He didn't just build it, he designed it. Specific dimensions, specific materials, based on plans he found in his travels. Ancient plans. Blueprints for something that shouldn't exist. Static crept into her voice. No, not static. Other voices, dozens, hundreds, all the conversations layering over each other. A symphony of last words. The walls don't just record death, they create it, they need it. Every person who dies here becomes part of the structure. Supporting beams made of souls. Mortar mixed with memory. I felt a pull toward the wall. Gentle at first, like magnetism. My hand reached out without my permission, fingertips brushing the warm plaster. Don't touch it! Jennifer's voice spiked with terror. Once you make contact, once you accept the connection, you can't, I can't, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Her voice shattered into echoes. Multiplied. Became a chorus of Jennifers. All different ages, all dying, all apologizing. The 21 minutes ended. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. I jerked my hand back, but too late. Something had changed. The wall wasn't just warm anymore. It had a pulse. I didn't sleep, couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the wall breathing against my back. Inhale, exhale. Patient as a predator. Dawn brought no relief. The morning light revealed what darkness had hidden. The walls weren't smooth anymore. Tiny cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. forming patterns, forming faces. Everyone who died in this room, their features etched in plaster like a memorial, like a menu. I tried to leave, packed a bag, made it to the door, but my feet wouldn't cross the threshold. Not wouldn't, couldn't. Like trying to push through invisible glass, the apartment had claimed me. I was part of the pattern now. So I did what David Marsh did, what Jennifer Reeves did, what everyone trapped in 3B eventually did. I researched Cornelius Ashford, shipping magnate, collector of occult artifacts. His manifests showed strange cargo, stone tablets from Mesopotamia, architectural fragments from temples that predated human civilization, books bound in materials that DNA tests couldn't identify. But it was his journal that revealed the truth. Found it digitized in the Miskatonic University archives. Page after page of fevered writing, calculations, diagrams, plans for a listening room based on pre-human geometry, a space that could capture moments, store them, play them back. Why? The journal's final entry explained. Eleanor spoke to me last night, 3 weeks after her funeral. Her voice came through the walls clear as church bells. Death isn't ending, it's translation. The walls can read that translation, can preserve it, can make it eternal. I'll never lose her again. But Ashford misunderstood what he'd built. The walls didn't preserve, they consumed. Each death made them stronger, hungrier, more aware. Night fell. I sat on my bed, waiting. The pattern demanded its due. 10:15, earlier than usual. The wall began to glow, not with light, with something else. Attention, focus, appetite. Sarah? My blood froze. My name. Someone was saying my name. Sarah, it's me. The voice clarified like a radio finding its station. Familiar. Impossible, my mother. Dead 6 months. Cancer. I'd held her hand at the end, whispered that it was okay to let go. Mom? My voice cracked like a teenager's. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Tears ran down my face. I knew it was a trick, a lure, the wall using my grief as bait. But knowing didn't matter. My hand reached out, touched the warm plaster. The connection exploded through me. Not painful, worse, euphoric. Every conversation the walls had ever captured flooded my consciousness. Thousands of voices, millions of words, birth cries and death rattles, love confessions and final curses. The entire history of human ending compressed into a singular moment of overwhelming presence. I saw how it worked. The building wasn't just listening, it was learning. Each death taught it more about human consciousness, about the moment of transition, about the energy released when life becomes not life. And it was almost ready, almost complete. One more death, one more voice added to the chorus. And it would have enough power to do what Ashford designed it to do, reverse the flow. Not just listen to the dead, speak as them, through them, a mouth made of memory, a tongue of collected trauma. The building would become a beacon, calling to things that existed outside time, outside death, things that had been waiting for an invitation to enter our world. Sarah, you have to stop it. Not my mother's voice anymore. Jennifer, David, Tommy, Eleanor, everyone who died in this room, speaking in unison, warning me. How? I gasped. Break the pattern, die wrong, die incomplete, leave something unfinished. I don't understand. The wall needs closure, needs endings. Give it a beginning instead. The voices faded. The connection severed. I collapsed on the bed, shaking, sick, but alive. Still alive. I understood what they meant. The wall fed on completed deaths, final words, last breaths, concluded stories. But what if someone died mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-word? What if someone died in the middle of beginning? 3 days, that's how long I had. The pattern was accelerating. The walls weren't just warm now. They were hot, feverish. The faces in the plaster moved when I wasn't looking. whispered when I tried to sleep. Mr. Chen stopped answering my calls. The other tenants avoided me in the hallways. Even the building's cats, strays that usually begged for scraps, hissed when I approached. Everyone and everything could sense it. I was marked, claimed, walking dead, but I had a plan. Terrible, desperate, probably wouldn't work, but it was better than becoming another voice in the wall. I spent those 3 days writing. Not an ending, a beginning. The first chapter of a novel I'd never finish. The opening line of a conversation I'd never complete. The start of a story that would remain forever unresolved. I wrote it on the walls, every surface, every room, covered the death messages with life fragments, painted over the faces with potential, turned the apartment into a canvas of incompletion. Chapter 1. The Day I Learned to Fly. Once upon a time there was. She opened the door and saw, the first thing you need to know is beginnings. Hundreds of them. Each one a broken promise. A story interrupted, a thought unfinished. The walls fought back. The temperature rose until paint bubbled. Plaster cracked and bled something that wasn't water. Voices screamed through the vents. Not words, just rage. I'd corrupted their perfect pattern, introduced chaos into their careful collection. October 30th. Anniversary of David Marsh's death. The day the building expected to complete its purpose. I sat in the center of my bedroom, surrounded by my unfinished sentences. Waiting. Midnight approached. The walls began to pulse, not like a heartbeat, like contractions, like birth pangs. The building was trying to deliver itself into a new state of being, but my beginnings were working. Each incomplete thought was a snag in the pattern, a glitch in the system. The building shuddered, groaned, tried to find the rhythm it needed. 11:59. The faces in the walls opened their mouths, spoke in unison. Finish it. No, complete the pattern. I refuse. You will die incomplete. That's the idea. Midnight, the moment of transformation. But instead of one voice joining the chorus, instead of one final death completing the circuit, there was silence. Broken silence. The kind that comes not from ending but from interruption. From a song cut off mid-note. From a sentence that never finds its period. From a story that refuses to conclude, the walls cracked. Not small spiderweb fractures. Deep structural breaks. The building screamed. Not with human voices, but with its own alien pain. It had been built to collect endings. I'd force-fed it beginnings, like pouring water into an electrical circuit, like dividing by zero. The apartment shook. Plaster rained from the ceiling. I should have run, should have fled. But I stayed, kept writing, one more beginning, one more incomplete thought, one more. The floor gave way. I fell. Not down, sideways, through time, through the collected moments, past David Marsh at his typewriter, past Jennifer Reeves painting warnings, past Tommy dying in his mother's arms, past Eleanor Ashford coughing her last. I fell until I landed in 1892, the building's first day. Fresh paint, new wood, empty walls waiting to be filled, and there was Cornelius Ashford, alone in what would become apartment 3B, pressing his ear against a wall that wouldn't speak for another 26 years. "Eleanor," he whispered, "Eleanor, can you hear me?" He couldn't see me. I was just another ghost, another echo, but I could see him, could see the moment the building truly began. Not with death, with grief, with a father's desperate desire to hear his daughter again. The building had been born from love, twisted love, corrupted love, but love nonetheless. I reached out, touched the wall, left one more unfinished message. The end is actually the... And then I was back, sprawled on my bedroom floor, Dawn light streaming through cracked windows. The walls were quiet, not silent, quiet. The difference between death and sleep. I'd broken the pattern, confused the building's purpose. It still held its voices, its collected endings, but it could no longer use them. Could no longer grow, could no longer become. I should have left then. Found a new apartment. A normal place with normal walls. But I didn't, because someone needs to guard this place. Someone needs to make sure the pattern stays broken. Someone needs to keep writing beginnings on the walls. So I stay. I listen to the voices, the conversations from decades past. I document them, honor them, but I never let them complete, never let them find their endings. Sometimes, late at night, when the walls warm with remembered death, I hear my grandmother again. "Sarah, honey, pass me that butter dish." And I always reply the same way. The only way that keeps me safe, that keeps the building sleeping, that keeps the pattern broken. In a minute, Grandma. Let me just start something first. Because the scariest thing about death isn't that it ends. It's that sometimes, in certain places, under certain conditions, it doesn't. Did you hear that? That whisper just now, check your walls. Press your ear against them. Listen closely. Every building has voices. Every room remembers. Every wall collects words. The only question is, are you brave enough to hear what they're saying? And more importantly, when they ask you to complete their stories, to finish their sentences, to give them the endings they crave, will you have the strength to leave them unfinished? Tell me in the comments, have you ever heard voices in your walls? Have you ever felt like your home was listening, watching, waiting? Share your experiences, but whatever you do, don't tell me how they ended. Some stories are safer left incomplete. Now, sleep. Or at least, try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, that's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, soft where wet, wrong. Like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you, does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot behind the curtain every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't, because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up. That's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, because soon it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different. Not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you. Still in control, for now. You could still check. You could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still, let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. And it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you, and comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can.